So speaking of children, there is, I know Radonova just published maybe you saw it, a new manual for measurement in schools.
Okay.
Actually. How do you, I'm typically interested in Canada, and also if you can chime in with US as well, how the measurements in schools are conducted, and more importantly, is this an area where people are starting to become aware or still not interested in?
Well, I'll speak to the Canadian example. So in Canada we have multiple provinces. Some provinces 100% of schools have been radon tested, and if high, reduced. Okay. This also applies to colleges and universities, and so I can speak to my particular university that I'm a part of. Every single building that is in our building portfolio has been radon tested, and if it was high, meaning in this case even over 100 becquerels, it was mitigated. And that's because we have a responsibility to the students and staff and everyone in there, and it's really, really important. There is a protocol, at least in Canada, for how you would test a building like a school, where you would test a certain number of the classrooms and of course any of the below grade, meaning the under the ground rooms and buildings. And there's a prescribed process through which that happens to ensure that you're not missing any areas of the building that could potentially put people in harm's way.
Yeah, I think this is, I don't know about you, Jose, I know you cover the Spanish market, if this is even a topic over there, or it's still very
not at the moment.
Sure.
Talking about Spain, there is a new legislation in place since the beginning of this year that mandates to perform radon measurements at the workplaces. This is totally new in the country, and for sure schools will be a target in the future. I am pretty sure of that. But it's a lot of work still to be done in that country, that just to convince the authorities that it is very important also. I totally agree with you. I mean, to measure in the schools and in universities, not only for the students, but also, as you said, for the staff as well. I mean, this is extremely important. This is another workplace.
Yeah, sure. I mean, typically the staff, teachers, they spend their days maybe even in one classroom, depending on how the structure is built out. Right. So let's say you're in an area where, for various reasons, there's high radon levels. Right. You spend all your, we're not even doing this at our office. Yep. The teachers are especially in
they may be in one room for longer than the students, so they're all
right.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. That is interesting, but what might be even more interesting is your work, right? You do all these different researches, studies. I know recently you had one published in Nature, of radon measurements in comparing different areas, different environments, countries. Could you go a bit into depth on this study and why it is such important? Because I know me and Jose were talking when it was published a lot about how excited we were for, and it was published, correct me if I'm wrong, in Nature.
In Scientific Reports, which is Nature's transdisciplinary journal, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of the work that we do in the space of radon really involves a lot of different aspects, from radiation exposure to epidemiology, even a lot of geoscience and the built environment. And so when you're publishing like that, you need a journal that can appreciate all of those many different fields at the same time. So Scientific Reports is often where we produce the scientific research on this. And so I think the study that you're referring to is where we compared actually Sweden to Canada. Right. And one of the reasons we did so is that Sweden and Canada have had actually very different trajectories in terms of how radon has been shaped by the built environment. And build codes in both countries, we compared those. And if you look at a house built in the 1980s, Sweden and Canada have more or less the same innate radon risk for a residential house. And if it was the 1950s, Sweden has way higher. And if it's the 2020s, Canada has way higher. And why is that? And that's really what we were delving into, is trying to figure out the why for why certain types of houses built in a certain decade in a certain country have far higher radon versus others. Because that really, at the end of the day, becomes very important to figuring out solutions to the problem, so that we can stop the problem from being developed in the first place, unintentionally certainly, by those amongst us who built houses, but it can be done.
For example, in Sweden, a big majority of people measuring radon, they measure because they recently moved to a new home, they renovated their home. This is a big part of why you measure for radon. So is this, you think, is the same in other countries, for example, Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot of people through the Evict Radon National Study, which is the name of the study we run. And they're coming back to us wanting to retest because they performed a renovation. They have developed the basement, or for example, changed the roof, or they have a new furnace, or maybe they've completely torn down the old house on the same land and rebuilt it from scratch. And we will typically see a completely different radon result as a consequence. The same land, but a totally different, often higher radon result for the new building in Canada. That may or may not be the case here in Sweden, but when people modify buildings, they will modify the radon, and you need to retest to know that.
That's very interesting, Aaron, that you said that normally higher levels after the renovation of the house.
That's right.
This is very, very interesting.
And this happens sometimes here in Sweden as well, quite a lot actually. So how can this be? We know the different scientific reasons, but how can this be to the viewer watching this?
Mm-hmm.
How can this be so common?
At the end of the day, it usually comes down to aerodynamics and how much fresh air your house is be able to bring in versus it exhales. Houses breathe like we do. And very often a renovation will unintentionally change the balance of air intake to air going out. And if that balance is in such a way that the house can't breathe in enough, it instead will suck on the ground. Well, of course, that means it brings in radon, right? And so that's the most common reason we find that a renovation to a house unintentionally increases the radon. Other reasons can be increased tightening of the overall building envelope, meaning it's often done for energy efficiency reasons. And energy efficiency in of itself will not increase the radon if it is done correctly.
Sure, yeah.
But renovations are often done in a way that wasn't entirely by design. It was done after the fact of the house being built, and so that can have that effect. And as long as you test for the radon, you know whether or not that's the case. It's always fixable.
It's always. I think this is the note to leave on. It's always fixable.
Right.
Yeah.
You just gotta. It all starts with a measurement.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's the only way to
and
know.
I think it's very important, to get this message to the viewer that you can fix the problem. First you need to measure, but the problem has a solution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's important for people to know. And
And the way I often describe it is it's a permanent investment, right? Because a typical house, once fixed for radon once, is fixed for radon forever.
Right. But it's an investment for your health.
That's right.
That's important.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's the most important investment you can do. I think this is the perfect note to leave on. Thank you, Aaron, so much for joining us. Jose, my dear colleague, thank you as well. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you.